She was the rich employer, and I was the maid who loved her. I still remember the exact moment. I realized I had fallen in love with someone I could never have. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was polishing the marble floors of her penthouse while she stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathed in golden sunlight, her silk robe flowing around her like water. Catherine Beaumont, my employer, my impossible dream, the woman who owned everything, including, somehow, my heart. My name is Maria, and I came to this country with nothing but a worn suitcase and my mother's old rosary. I was 23, desperate for work, willing to do anything to send money back home to my sick father and younger siblings. The agency sent me to the Beaumont residence without much explanation. Just an address in the wealthiest part of the city and a stern warning to be professional, punctual, and invisible. That last part would prove to be the hardest instruction I'd ever received. Catherine was 31 when I first met her. Though she carried herself with a grace that seemed both ancient and timeless, she had inherited her family's real estate empire after her parents died in a plane crash, and the loneliness of that tragedy lived in her eyes like permanent shadows. She was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair always perfectly styled, lips that rarely smiled, but when they did, the whole room seemed to brighten. She wore designer clothes that cost more than I'd earn in a year, and she moved through her enormous apartment like a ghost haunting her own life. For the first 6 months, we barely spoke. I would arrive at 6 in the morning, let myself in with my key, and begin my work while she was still asleep. I cleaned her home as if it were a sacred temple, touching her belongings with a reverence I didn't quite understand. Her books, her photographs, her half-empty wine glasses left on the balcony. Each item told me something about her. She read poetry in 3 languages. She collected first editions of novels about doomed love affairs. She cried sometimes when she thought no one could hear. I learned her rhythms, her habits, her unspoken needs. I started leaving fresh flowers in her bedroom. Simple daisies at first, because they seemed less presumptuous than roses. I made sure her coffee was ready exactly how she liked it. Even though making coffee wasn't technically part of my duties, I folded her clothes with a tenderness that embarrassed me, imagining what it would feel like to unfold them, to be the one she chose to reveal herself to. The first time Catherine really looked at me, I mean truly looked, not just glanced in my direction while giving instructions, was on a rainy afternoon in October. I had been working for her for 8 months. She came home early from a business meeting, her makeup smudged, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I was in the living room, and I should have made myself scarce. Disappeared into another part of the apartment. But something in her brokenness called to something in mine. I did something incredibly stupid and unprofessional. I walked over to her and asked if she was okay. She looked up at me with those devastating eyes, and for a moment I saw past the wealth, past the designer labels, past everything that separated us. I saw a woman who was drowning in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt empty on the inside. She whispered that her business partner had betrayed her, that everyone wanted something from her, that she was so tired of being alone even when surrounded by people. I made her tea. I sat with her, not too close, but close enough. I didn't offer advice or platitudes. I just existed beside her pain, letting her know without words that someone saw her, really saw her, and didn't want anything in return. When she finally stopped crying, she touched my hand just for a second and said thank you. That touch burned through me like lightning. That touch changed everything. After that day, something shifted between us. She started coming home earlier, finding excuses to be in whatever room I was cleaning. She asked me about my life, my family, my dreams. I told her about my father's illness, about my sister who wanted to be a teacher, about how I'd always loved painting but had to give it up to work. She listened like my words mattered, like I mattered. The distance between employer and employee began to blur in dangerous, intoxicating ways. Catherine started leaving me notes, little messages on expensive stationery thanking me for things that were just part of my job. She bought art supplies and left them in my small room off the kitchen, claiming she'd ordered them by mistake. She asked me to call her by her first name when we were alone. Every gesture felt like a secret language, a tentative reaching across the vast divide of our circumstances. I knew I was in love with her on a December evening when she asked me to stay after my shift ended. She had set up her record player and was listening to old jazz, drinking wine by the fireplace. She poured me a glass without asking, and we sat together watching the flames dance. She told me about her ex-husband, a cruel man who had married her for her money and left her. Convinced she was unlovable, she told me about the pressure of running a company, of never knowing who wanted her for herself versus her wealth. She told me she felt more comfortable with me than anyone else in her life. I wanted to tell her that I loved her. I wanted to say that she was the most extraordinary person I'd ever met, that her loneliness broke my heart, that I would give anything to be the one who could heal it. But I knew the cost of such words. I was a maid. She was a billionaire. We lived in different universes that had briefly, miraculously overlapped, but that didn't mean they could merge. The torture of loving her became my daily reality. Every morning, I would make her bed and fight the urge to bury my face in her pillows. Every evening I would see the parade of suitors her friends tried to set her up with wealthy men and women from her social circle who could never see her the way I did. I watched her go on dates and come home disappointed. I cleaned up the evidence of her loneliness while my own grew so large it threatened to consume me. Then came the night that nearly destroyed me. Catherine hosted a charity gala at her penthouse, and I was there in my maid's uniform, serving champagne to people who looked through me like I was furniture. I watched Catherine in a stunning black gown, playing her role as the gracious hostess, and I realized how foolish I'd been. She belonged to this world of glittering surfaces and strategic networking. I was a fantasy, a temporary escape from her real life. I decided that night that I would quit. I couldn't keep torturing myself with proximity to something I could never have. I wrote my resignation letter with tears streaming down my face, planning to leave it on her desk and disappear before I made an even bigger fool of myself. But Catherine found the letter before I could leave. The last guest had gone home, and she stood in the doorway of my tiny room, holding my words in her trembling hands. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Shock. Hurt? Something else I was afraid to name. She asked me why I was leaving. I couldn't tell her the truth, so I made up excuses about family obligations and needing to go home. She didn't believe me. She stepped into my room, closing the door behind her, and the air between us crackled with everything we'd never said. She asked me in a voice barely above a whisper if I was leaving because of her. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. She moved closer and I could smell her perfume, see the pulse beating in her throat. She asked me if I felt it too, this impossible thing that had grown between us. If you're watching this story and it's touching something deep in your heart, if you've ever loved someone you thought you couldn't have, if you believe in the kind of connection that transcends circumstances, please let me know in the comments below. Share your own story, or just tell me that you understand this feeling. Your words mean everything, and they remind us all that we're not alone in our struggles to love and be loved. I finally found my voice. I told her the truth, that I loved her, that I'd loved her almost from the beginning, that every day working for her was both heaven and hell. I told her I was nobody, nothing, that I had no right to these feelings, but they existed anyway, powerful and undeniable. I expected her to fire me, to be disgusted or pitying or both. Instead, she kissed me. Catherine Beaumont, who could have anyone in the world, chose me. She kissed me with a desperation that matched my own, with years of loneliness seeking refuge in another person's arms. She told me between kisses that she loved me too, that she'd been terrified to admit it, that she didn't care about the differences between us. She said I was the first person in her life who wanted nothing from her, except to know her, to see her, to stand beside her pain without trying to fix or exploit it. Our love story wasn't easy after that. We faced judgment from her social circle, from people who couldn't understand how someone like her could choose someone like me. Catherine's business associates questioned her judgment. Some of my fellow domestic workers accused me of using her. We had to navigate a world that wasn't built for relationships like ours, that wanted to reduce our love to a scandalous headline or a problematic power dynamic. But Catherine proved everyone wrong. She didn't want me to stay as her maid. She wanted me as her partner, her equal. She helped me enroll in art school, supporting my dreams the way I had supported her through her loneliest moments. She introduced me to her friends not as an employee, but as the woman she loved. When people tried to shame her, she defended our relationship with a fierceness I'd never seen before. She told them that love doesn't follow rules or recognize class boundaries, that I had given her something her money could never buy. genuine connection. I learned that being loved by Catherine meant being challenged to grow. She wouldn't let me hide behind my insecurities or use our different backgrounds as an excuse not to claim my own worth. She pushed me to finish my education, to exhibit my art, to see myself as she saw me, as someone talented and valuable and deserving of every good thing. She taught me that love isn't about one person rescuing another. It's about two people choosing each other and then building something beautiful together. Years have passed since that December night when everything changed. I'm no longer a maid living in a tiny room. I'm an artist with my own gallery, and Catherine is still by my side, not as my employer, but as my wife. We got married in a small ceremony with just our closest friends and my family, who flew in from home to witness. Two women who weren't supposed to fit, choosing each other anyway. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something special. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, if it gave you hope that your own impossible dream might not be so impossible after all, please leave a comment sharing what this meant to you. Tell me about your own journey with love, or simply write one word that captures how you're feeling right now. We still live in that penthouse, but I've filled it with my paintings, images of the moment. I first saw her in the sunlight the day she held my hand, the night she kissed me and changed both our lives forever. Catherine says our home finally feels like a home now, alive with color and emotion instead of pristine and empty. People sometimes ask me if I ever feel strange about how we met, if the inequality of our beginning bothers me. The truth is, our love wasn't built on what we had or didn't have materially. It was built on recognition, too lonely. People finding in each other the acceptance and understanding they'd been searching for. Catherine needed someone who would love her for herself, and I needed someone who would see past my circumstances to the person I could become. I was the maid who loved the rich woman who employed her, yes, but I was also the artist, the dreamer, the daughter, the survivor, and she was more than her wealth. She was kind, wounded, brave, and searching for real connection in a world full of shallow interactions. Our love story isn't about overcoming class differences so much as it's about recognizing that the heart knows nothing of such boundaries. Love finds us in unexpected moments, in impossible situations, and asks only that we be brave enough to reach for it. Some fairy tales begin in castles, but ours began in the ordinary act of cleaning one, and somehow that makes it even more magical. The idea that love can transform any space, any relationship, any life, if we're willing to let it. Catherine was my employer, yes, but more importantly, she became my home, and I became hers.